Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Cook, and I'm the programmer of The Ties That Bind, the films of James Gray. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the first screening of the series of The Yards. To begin, we would like to acknowledge that tonight's event takes place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are grateful to be able to live and work on this land. On behalf of TIFF, I'd also like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, and our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa, as well as TIFF Cinematheque's public supporters, Ontario Creates, and the Canada Council for the Arts. We are a charitable organization, so we'd also like to thank our donors and members for making TIFF's year-round programming and initiatives like this possible. So round of applause to them, please. In the past 25 years, James Gray has created a body of work with one of the most distinct visions of any contemporary American filmmaker. Elegant, subtle, his approach to filmmaking recalls a level of artistry and craft that has often linked him to great filmmakers of the past, but perhaps more importantly, distinguished him from filmmakers of the present. As you'll see throughout the series, his films are concerned with fundamental existential questions about the human condition, choices, responsibility, and what it means to be an individual when forces outside of our control, such as blood ties, the environments we're born into, or class, shape our fate. We're beginning tonight with The Yards, which is a personal favorite of mine. And also, James will be here at 9:30 introducing his Carte Blanche selection, which is a pre-code film by William Wellman, Other Men's Women. So I hope you stick around for that. And there are still tickets available for an extended In Conversation with James Gray tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And I please urge you to consider coming to the 4:45 p.m. screening of Little Odessa on Sunday. James might disagree with me, but I think it is a masterpiece and one of the great debut features. And it's very rare and difficult to see, so you should come out and take advantage. It is a great pleasure to share this series with you, but an even greater one to do it with the director here in town. So please join me in welcoming James Gray.
What do you want me to say? They have to... Is this on? I don't really even need this. What do you want me to say? They haven't seen the picture yet. After the picture, they can throw fruit at me. I just did this thing in Marrakesh where I was on the jury of the festival there. It was excellent. I saw a lot of great movies, but invariably the movies I liked the least were the ones where the director would talk the most before the movie would begin. So in that tradition, you see the picture. I'm glad you like it that much. I haven't seen it in forever. I feel tempted to sit through it, but maybe we'll go to dinner. Anyway, I hope you like the picture. If you don't, stay and throw rotten fruit at me. Anything else you want to talk about? You want me to say anything else?
Let's leave it for after the film.
I think so. I think they can ask me any questions they want after the movie.
Thank you. Enjoy the film.
Thank you for coming. Hello. You had to see who the legal assistant was in the production office. That's what you were watching. I was just telling Adam that you have Star Wars to thank for that. Did you know that? That was the first movie that listed every human who ever worked on the movie ever. But I say it as a joke, but when I was a kid and went to the movies, the movie would end. If I loved the movie, which was a lot of the time, and it blew me away, it would just end. And it was like a dream. And something about this violates that, doesn't it? Right? The production accountant, it's like, I just remember, the horror. Let's go home now,
But if we do stick around to the very end for the credits there, we get the sound of the railroad.
Yeah,
the yards,
I do that
and you do
on every
that at the end
movie.
of every film, right?
I do that on every movie. The new one's got silence. That's space. I'm not there yet. Not at the end
Spoilers. Before we open it up to the audience, I'll ask a couple questions. Maybe you could tell us about why you set the yards with this backdrop of the railroad contractors and the corruption.
Well, it's my dad's story. My dad is James Caan in it. Distinctly less cool version of James Caan. Don't pay attention to that, Dad. No, but it's my father's story. I'm going to have to actually take off my coat here. My father was, I'm from Queens, New York, from a semi-attached row house in a working class neighborhood. There was a bar on the corner called Gantry's Pub. And every Friday and Saturday, they had a horrible brawl outside. And I always thought I got to put a fight like that in a movie I make. So that's where the fight between Joaquin and Mark comes from. I wanted to do like a realistic brawl. The actors didn't appreciate that the next day. But, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't get out enough. In any event, to make a long story longer, my father's story was this, and, I had a very good friend who I based Joaquin's character on, and, I just tried to make it as autobiographical as I could. And my father had been going through a big legal catastrophe, which resembles the one in this movie, except he didn't get out of it. And so I just decided to make a movie about it. And this is a very popular subject for motion pictures, the New York City train yards. So that represented its own issue. But I found people insane enough to make it, I think I pitched it as, I think I said it's going to be like Chinatown or something, which, by the way, wasn't a hit when it came out either, so I don't know why they fell for it. But they did, and I made it, and then it was hell, and that's now I'm here, 20 years later or whatever it is.
And yeah, it was not easy to make. Your first feature came out 6 years earlier. It was a struggle to get this made. It doesn't necessarily resemble exactly what you had in mind at first.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's screwed up about the film now, if I may be so direct about it, I think the ending is wrong. The ending was changed. The movie originally ended just at that funeral wake, and then it cut to a shot of Mark Wahlberg on the train. So it was kind of the movie ends where he began. And there were other things in the film, too. It's one of the only times that I think a director's cut is actually, which does exist, thanks to Steve Soderbergh. It's one of the only times a director's cut exists that's actually significantly shorter than the studio version. I mean, the rest of the movie, I don't distance myself from it at all, because the movie is very much what it was supposed to be, except for the last beat of the film and a couple of other moments. And there was a bit more fleshed out with Faye Dunaway, which I thought was important for the ending, which got cut, actually. But, that's movies. I mean, very rarely do you see something that is completely untouched by idiots.
And it was...
I mean, that's the business. You have idiots who think they're creative, and they fuck with you, and that's what you have to deal with.
And you're avoiding naming he who shall not be named, Harvey Weinstein.
No, I'll say it. I mean, I'll say it. I said it at the time, and I was, by the way, a filmmaker friend of mine who shall remain nameless because he's famous now, said, "What are you doing, man? What are you doing?" When I went public with what an asshole Harvey Weinstein was. And I said, well, if I don't say it, somebody else will make another movie with him. And some people should know what he's like. He's an animal. And they said, well, you'll never work again. I said, you know what? I'll go to France. I'll make a movie there. But, these are the same people who all were like, acolytes of fucking McCarthy, right? Gutless assholes. And now with Trump, the same kind of thing. So I said, I don't care. So I went public with it, and it did screw me over. It took me a while to get the next film made, but I look like a fucking god now. I go to parties, man. I'm the hit of the room. Because here's the thing. Harvey was Harvey, and I'm glad I can say was. Harvey was terrible. Harvey was terrible. Harvey was terrible to actors and actresses. Harvey was really terrible to film directors because he wanted to be a film director, and he was. People don't know this. Harvey did 2 movies. Did you know this? Harvey directed a horror film called The Burning in 1980. And he made another picture called Playing for Keeps, not the one they made a more recent, Playing for Keeps 1983 or something like that. And of course, they're worthless. So what he decided that he would do was torture directors. And I kind of didn't like that. And he and I were not a good combination. And then he wound up releasing a movie that I made later in my career, which I had nothing to do with. They sold him the movie.
He bought The Immigrant after he'd already made it.
The Immigrant I had final cut on. By that time, I had final cut. So I didn't change a frame. And he didn't like that either. So we fought on that movie, but I said, listen, I got final cut. I'm not touching a frame. He said, well, then I'm not going to release it. So I said, okay, here's the thing, Harvey. I got you over a barrel. I said, because... He goes, what do you mean? If I don't release it, nobody sees it. I said, well, here's what happens. You don't release it. It becomes that movie that nobody could see. And 10 years from now, people go, there's a screening. And then it becomes more famous than you could possibly imagine. And I'm like, man, I'm like fucking Obi-Wan Kenobi. You kill me, and I'll just come back stronger, Darth Vader. No, anyway. Thanks for laughing. I am kidding. Some jokes are just for me. But I said at the time, I said, that's what will happen, Harvey. If you don't release it, it'll just be that movie. And if it is good, it'll be discovered. And if it's not, it doesn't deserve to be, in which case that's what it should be anyway. Fuck you, when he released it. That's how it came out. And he did a terrible job of it, but it didn't matter. It came out and was, well received and everything. But that was that. I don't know why he bought the film, because by the end of this, the relationship was toxic. But, I feel bad talking about this because, honestly, it's literally over 20 years. Oh, no, it's 20 years ago now. It's over 20 years since I made the film. And I'd rather talk about what the movie is or, what, the work. So, I'm not comfortable talking about this stuff.
So could we talk about how this is your first film you made with Joaquin Phoenix?
Yeah.
I believe you actually wrote it for him in mind, or at least
that's not true.
You had him in mind after you saw To Die For, the Gus Van Sant film.
Yeah, I didn't write it for him. I didn't know who he was when I wrote it. Who did I write it for? I wrote it for my friend Michael Reifenkugel. I don't know where he is now. Half the people I knew growing up in school are dead. The other half are in jail. And that's an absolute fact. It's a very grim fact. Somehow I got out. But Joaquin, I had seen To Die For. And he was introduced to me as a young Puerto Rican actor, which I thought was a bizarre way to introduce someone to me. But I wound up including that in the sort of backstory of the movie. But he was very, taking that. Hi, James. And I guess Harvey had sent the script to Liv Tyler. I didn't know this, and I love Liv, but I didn't know that she had gotten the script. And I guess he picked it up and read it. I was like, how come you get all the cool movies? So actually it was his camp who reached out to meet with me. And I didn't know whom to cast at that time. And he showed up and he was like, hey, man, how you doing? I said, hey, Joaquin? Hey, man. You wanted to meet? Yeah, no, I wanted to meet. I don't know. Like, did you read the script? Yeah. Did you like it? Yeah, I kind of read it. I read it. I kind of did, yeah. I said, all right, well, it's a hell of a meeting. Thanks a lot. And then before I knew it, I was working with him. But I loved him. He was very different then than he is now. I mean, he was, I think, 20 years old or something when I made the film. He was so young, and so was she, Charlize. Mark was a bit older, but not much. And he was a very charismatic and extremely intelligent and sensitive person. I'm joking about him, which is terrible because he's a brilliant guy. But he was completely untrained. I mean, he had no method, and I don't mean the method. I mean, he had no structure to his work. And then he would be in scenes with Ellen Burstyn, who is the queen of the method. And you would, if I did 8 takes, for example, you could apply direction, an adjustment. You give an adjustment to Ellen Burstyn, and she would apply it through the whole take. And she'd be either great or you'd need to work on it more. But whatever the case, she would be clearly working with a process in mind. And Joaquin would do something amazing on take 1, and the rest of the take I wouldn't like so much. Then something amazing midway through the take on take 3, but the first part of the take wouldn't be. So my style had to change. I wanted to do a lot of elaborate masters, which I had done on my first movie, but I had to stop doing that here because the acting styles of the older actors was so completely different from the younger. And that includes actually Charlize and Mark, who has more craft than you might think, actually. So, but now Joaquin has gone to the dark side in a good way. He has an unbelievable amount of craft, and so now, like I did a movie with him later called Two Lovers, where I have a lot of stuff that is playing in one, and I think 33 takes of a scene between him and Gwyneth Paltrow on a rooftop. And I could have used 20 of them in the movie. At some point, I was just playing. So his style has evolved greatly. I'm anxious to work with him again, and I'm sure that I shouldn't say I'm sure that I will, but hopefully I will, because I've been told from friends of mine who've worked with him that he's very different. So I'm excited. Didn't answer your question. Did he have a question? I don't know.
If there are any questions in the audience, just raise your hand. We have a mic going around. I think we have one here. Just wait. The mic will be there in just a sec.
You know, the room is really not big enough for mics to be required. So I feel good about being able to hear him.
Anyway, thank you so much, Mr. Gray. Thank you. This was a really, really wonderful film, and I read somewhere that you modeled this after some Claude Chabrol films. And as a fellow enthusiast of his myself, I just want to know which films did you come back to most often during the production of this movie?
How could he be otherwise wearing an Agnes Varda T-shirt? What kind of crowd is this?
Those are actually available in the TIFF bookstore.
Is it? By the way, she's one of the great people ever. She's as vivacious and awesome as she was when she was 20. She's 90-something years old, and like a force of nature. I just spent a great deal of time with her in Morocco, and she's the best. Anyway, has nothing to do with anything, but you're wearing her shirt, so. Claude Chabrol has absolutely nothing to do with this movie. That's one of those great IMDb or whatever those things are, incorrect facts. Claude Chabrol, however, was a huge fan of this movie, I have to say, because I got to know Claude after this movie, and to this day, you've seen it in my house, right? The poster I have. How I got to meet him is a great story, and I will tell you about other movies, but this is a cool little tidbit about Claude Chabrol, whom I loved, who was a great man. This young woman comes up to me at the airport in Nice, and she hands me a pack, and she said, "My father, he wanted you to have this." Who are you? Of course, I'm thinking, letter bomb. But I go to my hotel room, and I pull something out of an envelope, not very large, and I keep unfolding it and unfolding it and unfolding it, and it's an original poster for a movie called Les Bonnes Femmes. And it's signed to James Gray from his absolute fan, Claude Chabrol. And the poster's in horrible shape. It was like in his garage or something. It was his daughter who in the airport gave me this poster. And it took everything I had not to burst into tears, because I had seen Chabrol's work and loved many of his movies, but it was not an inspiration for this. I did rip off other movies, and those we can talk about. But I had to get the poster restored, right? I had to get it took a tremendous amount of time, but they had to put it back together and get the folds and the rips out and bleach it white because it was all yellowed and everything. Anyway, it's still sitting in my living room. It's great. And he was a great man. He knew everything about everything, and he had a great sense of humor. And he'd say, yes, I made 17 horrible movies, 6 pretty bad movies, 5 good ones, 3 great ones, and some that it's up to you. Like, he had like a way of like he was an amazing guy. He knew every great wine. Anyway, I ripped off for this, Rocco and His Brothers by Luchino Visconti. I ripped off, I had seen a movie called, I guess in English, not to be pretentious because I'll butcher the pronunciation anyway, in English it would be Hands Over the City by a director named Francesco Rosi, with Rod Steiger, weirdly, even though it's in Italian. It's about the corrupt politicos in Italy and building codes, and it's very obscure, but a wonderful movie. And I was really obsessed. In particular, I was obsessed with doing something in the tradition of those kind of Italian 1950s, early 1960s movies with characters doing melodramatic things and just bordering over the top crying, and I was really into that. And of course the fight. I don't know if you've seen Rocco and His Brothers. If you haven't, yeah, it's a masterpiece. But it has. If you haven't seen it, you should. It's one of the really landmark movies, and it's got this amazing fight between Alain Delon and Renato Salvatore in the streets of Milan at night. And it's a staggering moment, and you're watching this 3-hour-long film. And I remember as a teenager seeing the movie And it's 3 hours, and it's got this Nino Rota score, and we know Francis Coppola saw that before The Godfather, that's for sure. And I'm watching it, and it's Rocco, Alain Delon, and his brothers, and they come from the south of Italy to the north. And, you know, in Italy, the south is like, they look at the north, looks at the south with resentment and disgust and terrible prejudice. And I'm saying, well, this is interesting. He's working at a laundromat. He's boxing. I don't really know what's happening. And then all of a sudden, about halfway through the movie, there's this rape and this fight in the streets, and the whole movie begins to come together as a story. And you realize where it's going, and it becomes like Dostoevsky. And I had seen this, I think maybe when I was 18, maybe 19. And it shook me. And I thought I had to rip that off. So that's what I tried to rip off here. It's not as good, obviously, but what happens is that you rip these movies off, and if you have anything interesting of your own to put into it, hopefully it shows. And if you don't, then it's not good. But anyway, that's what I ripped off. But the irony, one last thing, I'm sorry. One last thing about this, which is funny. A lot of people said to me, oh, it's like The Godfather, which it isn't really in story at all. It just has some top light with James Caan. Because people say that to me. I'm like, what? No, it's a guy working in the train yards. They're like, no, it's like The Godfather, man. I'd be like, it is? I guess it's because James Caan with the light over his head, you know, in the brown room or something. Because the story is nothing like it. And then I realized, well, no, actually, I was ripping off Rocco and his brothers, which Francis probably ripped off for The Godfather. So maybe they're right.
I think we have another question over here.
Hi, could you talk a little bit about working with Harris Savides on this film, and also maybe you've always worked with really amazing cinematographers. I think Lost City of Z is one of the most beautifully lit films I've ever seen. What the division of labor is like between the two of you, and what your process is with the cinematographer.
I'm always, thank you, I think. I'm always feel weird about that because, like, I feel like if the person is thinking of the quality of the lighting, that the movie has failed in a much greater way. But I'll take it as a compliment for tonight. My wife would tell me I should, so I will. So would my shrink. Harris was a great, great guy. Harris was a beautiful person. I was very close with him. This is the cinematographer who shot this movie. He died a few years ago of brain cancer. It was one of the big losses in his family's life and my life and people who knew him well. He looked like a cross between Colonel Kurtz and Luciano Pavarotti. He was a very heavy-set guy, and he would sort of stroke his bald head, and he would go, yeah, good. And I always knew if he liked the dailies because he would go, creamy. And if he didn't, he would say, I wasn't a bulldog, which to this day I don't really understand. But he had a painter's eye. I really responded to what he liked, and he responded to what I liked. We went to the museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, before shooting. We talked about what we liked. We didn't really watch movies. We looked at a lot of Georges de la Tour, the painter Georges de la Tour, and a lot of Rembrandt. So did Gordon Willis, I guess. But in any event, we looked at a lot of painters, and we did everything we could to destroy the film, which is what Darius Kanji and I have tried to do as well, because Kodak keeps making less grainy, sharper, like, and it's really funny because Harris and I decided, I said, Harris, what I want to do is make something that is like a nod to both those near-realist movies and also looks like somebody made a movie in 1971 and they lost it. And then it got restored and showed 30 years later or whatever. And he went, good, creamy. Okay. So one of the things we tried to do, and this tells you about the strange battle that you face, is I got a hold of this guy from Kodak. And we said, well, what are the stocks you suggest, blah, blah, blah. And we did all these camera tests with it. And Harris and we shot dailies, tests, and we took the film home to each of our homes, and I put it in the oven at 120 degrees for 8 hours, and then I brought it to the lab to have it developed, to see what it would look like. And we were so excited that this was going to break down the emulsion, and we were going to get that 1971 look. And it looked perfect. It looked fine. I called the guy from Kodak. I said, "Wait, dude, man, I put your film in the oven at over 100 degrees for 8 hours, and nothing happened." "Isn't that great? Isn't that great?" I'm like, no, you're losing the filmic quality. So we had to do everything we could to beat up the film, but the principles were always, and I still say this, I preach this still to the cinematographers with whom I work, is approach it as a painter would, because film is dying, and I don't know how much longer I'll be able to work with it. But one of the great things it has is the magic of the black. And I don't want it to be black. I want it to be deep brown, the way that the painters would do. Because in the first thing they tell you when they teach painting is, like, don't squeeze black onto the palette and then put it directly on the canvas. Why? Because black is the absence of all light, and that's not ever anything that exists in life. So Kodak is sitting there telling me, we can resilver your blacks, make them blacker than black, and everything looked like it was directed by Michael Bay. But I was interested in a kind of painter's approach to the image. So Harris and I talked about beating up the film as much as we could to try and draw the brown and the brown blacks, to try and make it so that the skin tones had a kind of, I called it, in the Leopard, he says, a line Burt Lancaster says is, he says, I seek the voluptuousness of death. So I kept quoting that to Harris, and I've quoted it to Darius as well and others. I said, we want the voluptuousness of death. And I remember telling it to Harris, and he went, I don't know what that is, but good, let's do it. But then he said, he interpreted it as a kind of brassy feel, a kind of an ochre to the skin tones, that everybody was here for just a moment in time. So anyway, I know it doesn't really answer your question, but the idea is really that the relationship with the cinematographer is my favorite thing other than the actors about making a movie, and I tend to like painterly images because it's what I really dreamed about as being a kid, was to be a painter, and I wasn't good enough, so I had to slum it by directing movies.
More questions? Yes, right here.
Speaking of collaborating, I know in a lot of your films you share, including this one, a writing credit with another writer. I was just wondering about your process of working with another writer. Is there a certain part of the script development that you prefer and someone else does, or I guess that process?
I really hate writing. I hate making the film. I hate mixing the film. But I like having made the film. So the writing process is terrible. If you've ever written something, you know what I'm talking about. The computer, you turn it on, and the screen is blank, and it says, fill me up, you asshole, right? And you either have ideas or you don't, but the computer doesn't give a shit. You got to have something at the end of the day. And just stealing a thought from Billy Wilder, because he always had collaborators, and he was far greater than I'll ever hope to be. He used to say very simply, 2 heads are better than one. So you can't have a dialogue really with yourself. I mean, maybe some people can, but I can't. And I like the exchange of ideas. I haven't had a co-writer on a couple of movies. I didn't have it on my first film because I wrote that in like 5 seconds, and it was one of those crazy things where I'm 23 years old and I think I'm great and I can do anything. I didn't have one on The Lost City of Z either, but I had a book in that case and mountains of research. And in a way, they were my friend. But I do prefer it. And I think that what happens with me is it's not a democracy. My vote counts for 10. But I have the exchange of ideas with another person. And it's very fruitful to me, and I like people who tell me that I'm not good or I'm doing something that's bad. To me, that's helpful. So the process really is I start by getting my co-writer and me. I make a lot of pasta, although now I'm on a keto diet, so I'm not eating carbs, which is really awful, by the way. Don't do it. I mean, I've lost a lot of weight, but I really love pasta. But I used to, so I'll say I used to because I haven't written a script since I've been on this goddamn diet. But they make a lot of pasta, and the writer comes over who's working with me, and we fill out index cards of scenes. And we make it as detailed as possible, and we put them all up on bulletin boards around my office. And then each day they come, and each day the writer comes with me, and we talk more, and then we work on a treatment, which I make as detailed as possible. And from that comes as detailed an outline as possible. So the actual writing takes not that long. The hard work, which takes months and months and months for me, is the outline, because story is structure. It's not really dialogue. So the structure of your story, how you distribute or release information as narrative, that's the hardest part of it. Does that make any sense at all? Okay.
I think absolutely, yeah.
Okay, good. Because it's a weird I mean, screenwriting is a brutally difficult thing because you are. It's like writing a blueprint, and in the editing process, you're always having to redo it because the actor brings something, the cinematographer brings something, everybody brings ideas. And so, I was just reading this book. What the hell is it called now? It's about the making of 2001, but I can't remember the actual title. It just came out not too long ago. And in it talks about this, the script work between Kubrick and Arthur Clarke, and then I read that The Thing, which is one of the greatest narrative ideas ever, where the computer is reading the lips of the astronauts, is the idea of some schnooky 21-year-old production assistant on the day. And it's like, what? And I read that, and on the one hand, that's very impressive that Kubrick was aware enough to accept that idea, which is great. But on the other hand, I'm sitting there going, well, fuck, I mean, screenwriting is really difficult, man. The guy's like, he didn't come up with that idea on the day. Like what he came with that in his office with they came up with it on the set. It's an organic process. It has to keep maturing. Now, it is not like this for everybody, because I know that Joel and Ethan Coen go into a room, they write the script, and the movie is word for word what that script is. I do not understand. But they do it, and it comes out, and it functions very well, so somehow that works. Everybody's process is different.
I think we're running out of time, so I think we have just one last question right here.
I flew all the way from Los Angeles, and we have
do we
2
have time
seconds to ask a goddamn
have more
question.
time than that?
I may as well get my money's worth. Go back to the hotel and eat a panini? I don't want to do that.
Thanks so much.
First over here, yeah.
Thanks so much for this. Always a pleasure watching your films. I have to ask you,
Thank
because
you.
you're not going to be here for the Two Lovers and We Own the Night screenings, and it really...
I'm not?
I don't think so.
I'm not? Why is that?
Stay.
Well, no, I don't want to stay. When is that? I don't even know what that is.
I think this upcoming week. I can't remember which exact day.
It's not happening. All right, what do you got?
Just because I think it really fits in with the club scene in this film, with those two films. I'm just curious, you really nail the being alive feeling in your club scenes. Your use of Blondie and We Own the Night and Moby and Two Lovers, and I don't know what song it is here. I'm just curious about how you how you create those scenes. Are they based out of your own? Are you huge into music? I know you know everything about the opera and stuff, but I'm curious.
Yes, I know everything about the opera.
No, I mean just reading your interview.
I just want to tell you one thing. I'm directing an opera next year in Paris. No, next year. Oh my God, it's this year, at the end of this year, and I have no idea what I'm doing. The idea that you'd say I know everything about the opera is so great, and the Paris Opera would love to hear you say that, and they would laugh in your face. Continue.
No, this is just basically that. Curious about your creation of the club scenes, and does that come from personal experience? So
Yeah.
I feel like you really nail it. I'm very much into
Thank
both
you.
film and music, and you really get what it's like to be that feeling your highest high, in the moment. Living in the moment.
Thank you. I have to say it was a major part of my teenage years. I have terrible hearing, in part because I spent a huge amount of time in a club called CBGB, which is now a clothing store. It's a John Varvatos on the Bowery in New York. But I had a mohawk. And the remaining evidence, by the way, I still will not part with my Doc Martens. But I was very much into the music scene in New York. And I always hoped, of course never did, but always hoped I would get laid at these places. And went a lot to, believe it or not, I was 12 years old. I was going to Studio 54. I mean, which is insane to admit that now. But I had a fake ID, which you could get from Times Square. Mine said Institute of Technology. And the drinking age was 18, and they didn't really enforce it. And I was going to all these places. It was a place, Danceteria, Studio 54, Xenons, Limelight. And then later I really got into punk. I started going to CBGB. And it always was, to me at that age, it was the central social locus for me. I like sports. I love baseball, but I'm not good at it, as you can probably tell. And so I couldn't hang out at, the gym or something. So I went and slam danced with my friends. So I always tried to personalize it as much as I could. By the way, the song in this movie is called Samba de Janeiro by a group called Bellini, who of course you'll never hear from since. Haven't heard from since. The reason it's here is I said, actually this bit me in the ass, but I'll tell you what I said. I'm going to just use the most popular club song right now. So I went to a couple of clubs, and that's what they were playing. So I used it in the movie. I actually think it works quite well. And I also tried to rip off a scene from a movie directed by a guy named Mikhail Kalazatov called I Am Cuba, which if you haven't seen that, you should see. It's a very strange and brilliant movie. You know that movie. 1964 movie where he was basically sent to Cuba by the Russians, by Mosfilm, to do this this propaganda movie about Cuba. I don't know how sin-illiterate. I don't want to sound like I'm condescending. I don't know.
They're brilliant.
Okay. I know I did this once, and everyone was like, we know what it is. And they were like angry. I'm like, I don't know. What do you mean? So anyway, there's a scene in a nightclub at the beginning of the movie where they're tossing this woman. These like obnoxious white American men are pushing this Latino woman, this Cuban woman who's forced into prostitution. They're pushing her back and forth between them. You remember that scene in the opening? It's really great, and I ripped it off. And I wanted to try and, because I wanted to, as pretentious as this is, but you're asking me, I wanted the idea of the scene to be that this was a very sensate existence, but also that she was going to turn out to be a rather innocent victim in the scheme of things. And I just feel that these things are it's a social locus of urban life. So it's my way of trying to communicate that. Now, I did the same thing with pieces of music. For We Own the Night, I said I want to use the most popular song in clubs. And I thought, well, I can't do that as period. So I just put Heart of Glass up against Picture, even though it wasn't from 1988 or whatever. It was from 1980 or 79. It worked. I thought it worked great. And it got criticized, actually, because it was from the wrong period. So I was really depressed, which is why, again, I have to work with the blinders on. I got really depressed. I chose the wrong music. It's not from that period. And then when I did Two Lovers, I said, okay, that's it. I'm going to get the most current piece of music. Again, I'm going to do the work. I go to a club. I'm like, I got to go. What are they playing? I walk in. It was called The Box in New York, which was the hip place at the time. I walked in. What's out of love? And it was a gas. I'm like, no, you can't be playing that. So I got Moby to give me his song for nothing, which is weird because that wasn't playing. But it seems very current for Two Lovers. And Joaquin did not want to do that scene. He said, come on, another scene in the club. I said, I understand that. So I said, well, what do you want? I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, I want to do I want to take the chicks to a roller rink. So I said, you want to do what? I think it would be good if I do all this roller rink stuff. So I said, might be kind of cool. I go to the producer. I said, well, he wants to reset in a roller rink. What do you think? I think it might be good. He goes, Jimmy, by the way, my impersonation is perfect. Jimmy, do you know what the insurance is? The actors fall, they break their heads open. Come on. I said, wait, but he sounds like a great idea. So finally, I get everybody to agree. We're going to do this scene in a roller rink. No roller rinks left in the entire city of New York. So I said, Wak, no more roller rinks left. Fine, I'll do a scene in the club. But I have an idea, and it involves Toronto. Joaquin was here for the Toronto Film Festival. I don't remember which movie. And he was in a bar, and he saw Harmony Korine do like a pop and lock move. And Harmony Korine, he's a very nice person. He's very talented. But you would not mistake him for Cary Grant. But Joaquin said as soon as he did that, the chicks dug him. So I said, really? He said, yeah, man, you don't understand. Harmony Korine did this move, man, and all of a sudden the chicks loved him. I was like, I don't know what the hell to make of that. But he's like, so I think what I should do is this should be like the one moment where Leonard is not like a loser, and I should do like a whole dance. So I'm operating one of the cameras, and the camera operators are operating another. We had handheld cameras. He said, you got one take at this, asshole. I said, okay. And he gave me this ridiculous dance routine. And I start laughing my ass off while I'm operating. And if you, one of the angles, which I was the one operating the one, well, I would show you, the camera's going like this because I'm laughing so hard at what he's doing, which is this absurd, like, breakdance nonsense. And he's actually kind of good at it. And I said, you're kind of good at it. He goes, listen, I'm a lot better at that, but I'm playing your character, so I have to embarrass myself.
And on that note, we are out of time. Unfortunately, you can ask James more questions tomorrow night for the
I got to come back
conversation
tomorrow
with
night.
7.
You can ask questions then. Am I doing that here? Or is that some other theater?
It's in the Lightbox in a different cinema. Yeah.
I don't know what that means. Is it the Lightbox?
All right. Thank you, James.
Thank you for showing
coming.
up.